Vasily Pavlov, until recently a war correspondent, and sometime before then a colonel in the Russian army. Various branches of service. I think we need to help them from a moral standpoint. They're fighting for justice, but also practically they are fighting so that the rest of the world doesn't have to. They are fighting international terrorism, which has, in a relatively short time, grown tremendously. And it really threatens not just Syria or countries in the Middle East, but the rest of the world. Overall, the problem of the Syrian army is not their motivation or their equipment, but that the army cannot win such a war by taking a town or winning a battle. This can last forever, this bug hunting. The army gets worn out chasing ghosts. The morale drops. They always take casualties, however small. And Syria, is not the Soviet Union, which could fight United Europe for 4 years. Yeah, so Syria has a much less diverse economy, and the number of the people they can conscript is much lower, and their economy is much weaker. That's why they don't have mass conscription, because if they conscript everybody, they will not have anybody working, and they won't have money to support such a large army anyway. So the reason that the Syrians aren't winning isn't some lack of motivation or their lack of training of the soldiers. I've never seen them lacking heart, but the problem is that terrorism, the terrorist guerrilla war, you can't win it by taking a town, but you need to protect each town you have at the same time. And no army can be strong in every town at once. Yes, so army attacks one town. To move the forces there, they need to move them from some other town. The town they leave immediately gets taken over by terrorists. This is sort of a new method of war, and it's a complicated question of how to fight it, because there's no recipe for it yet. There's talk about destroying this mythical infrastructure insurgents have. What is the insurgent infrastructure? Those are houses they took from civilians, right? We destroy that house, they just take another house from civilians. Let me step away a little bit. Let's look at the American air operation data. According to their claims, USA has conducted 8,800 airstrikes, spent $5 billion, destroyed 129 tanks. But insurgents don't make tanks. Those are American tanks that ISIS captured, and Americans spent this much money on destroying them. 356 cars they have destroyed. But insurgents don't make cars, they take them from civilians. So they don't actually do any real damage, and, it's not even necessarily true that those are terrorist cars. 600 terrorist camps, 4,500 buildings, but terrorists don't build buildings. Yes, okay, maybe there's some terrorists inside, or maybe there's nobody inside, or maybe there's civilians inside. You never know. See, that's another problem with air power. Well, for example, let's take the first Iraq campaign. American pilots have claimed to have destroyed 2 times more tanks than Iraq ever possessed. And after the war, it turned out that only about 15% of tanks were damaged. And out of them, 10% looked to have been damaged from the air. So that, the difference was 20 times between what the aviation reported and what actually happened on the ground. And that's not a problem with American pilots or American media. A pilot cannot really judge whether he hit the target correctly, or whether it's a real target or a fake, what happened. He just knows that he needs to hit specific coordinates and there must be a target there. He throws bombs, something explodes, that he thinks the target has been destroyed. So difference between what the pilot thinks and the real damage he does, approximately 20 times. So using air power in a war like this is hunting sparrows with a battleship cannon. Honestly, I don't think that this can make a real difference. As I have said, that American operation is just showing that they are fighting terrorists, right? They don't really achieve much in practice. Well, yes, of course, since they are funding some of the terrorists. They are bombing the terrorists who do not obey them, who do not follow the party line. So they're explaining that terrorists should be obedient. But the other terrorists, they are arming and funding them. And of course, ISIS is still funded by Qatar. Jabhat al-Nusra is still funded by Saudi Arabia. So the funding is still going on. And let's even imagine that those airstrikes on insurgent infrastructure, Americans claim to have destroyed 260 of them, oil derricks and such. Let's imagine that all the terrorist infrastructure has been destroyed. It's not like terrorists had them before the war started, right? Or before they took them over. Let's say they don't have them again. So terrorists would get less funding from oil. They will be more dependent on Qatar. Or let's say Jabhat al-Nusra will get more dependent on Saudis. And those few $1 million or few dozen $1 million that they get from oil trade is not so much money so that Saudis would not be able to simply give them. Moreover, since the oil won't actually go into the market, Saudis will simply sell the same amount of oil on the market and give cash to the terrorists. So this does not solve the overall problem. And coming back to that American data, they spent $5 billion to kill approximately 5,000 terrorists. So each terrorist cost $1 million. Maybe more, because we don't know if that's accurate. According to our Russian Ministry of Defense. 4,000 airstrikes killed several hundred terrorists. That proportion sounds more realistic. So, you understand. 4,000 airstrikes. Let's say they even killed 1,000 terrorists. That the cost of killing a terrorist is uncomparable. A terrorist costs $100 plus $100 to give him a rifle. And war is an economic contest. If we spend $1 million to kill a terrorist, whom the enemy hire for $200, we are losing the war. And talking about our planes in Syria, we essentially lost them. They will fly there, they will basically run out of their resource, and they will no longer be flight worthy. We could have just as easily have given them to Syrians and given them the ammo, and that would have been much easier. Yes, of course, our pilots gets experience. So our pilot gets experience, that's good. Yes, we get positive things. We get training, we get experience of fighting these modern wars. We show our political stance towards Syria, our stand against terrorism. In some locations, maybe we can save the lives of Syrian soldiers and bring tactical victories, free some towns. Yes, that's of course true, but it does not solve the root of the problem. The strategic solution has to be very different. Well, let's hope that our government makes some steps towards solving the problem overall. Maybe they are working on it already. I don't know. I'm a common person. Yes, that is one positive thing, because I was very afraid that our aircraft would be used against urban areas mostly. And that would have been tactically expedient and maybe militarily correct, but that would have been a very bad choice politically. It would have basically changed the attitude of Syrians themselves against us. It's one thing to have Arabs fighting each other in towns among civilians, another thing, crusaders showing up and starting to blow up civilians. Regardless of how many civilians die, it would have been a huge problem. And as far as I know, so far it has been successfully avoided. At least, as far as I know, I haven't seen any serious proof that our Air Force is conducting massed airstrikes in towns and cities. And that would have been all over the news if it was true. And, we would never live that one down. After all, I consider myself one of the leading Russian specialists on this war because I spent a year and a half studying it very in depth in the field. Of course, I was a war correspondent, but first and foremost, I'm a military officer, and I was interested in the tactics of terrorists, the tactics against them, how does the war progress. So, again, talking about destroying the insurgent headquarters, insurgent supply dumps, because this is somewhat different than what happens in practice. A simple example that everybody can understand. The insurgent headquarters cannot be very far from their combat units. And their communications are shortwave, which only reach 10 miles or so. And their fighters are almost exclusively in towns and cities. So saying that we conducted an airstrike against terrorist headquarters 100 miles away from the nearest city, maybe there was somebody there, but saying that it's a key tactical headquarters, there are exceptions to the rule, but it's unlikely. First and foremost, we need to publicly declare who the real enemies are. ISIS, terrorists, they are just tools. They are not the real enemy. The real enemies are Saudi Arabia, Qatar, USA, and Turkey, or people within their governments who are funding and arming the terrorists. ISIS are just a tool, a hammer. Like biting, trying to punch a hammer is completely useless. Like, even if you manage to break it without breaking your bones, they will just take another. Hammers are cheap. So we need to fight the problem at its source. So, first of all, we need to close the Syrian borders. So here, air power might be useful, but there's a problem there. Such tactic could lead to border conflicts. So, first of all, we need to declare that these countries are invading a sovereign state. Yes, this is hard, but without it, we can't do anything. We can spend forever swatting at flies, but if there's something nearby that attracts flies, then thousands more will come. So this type of war has not really been waged before. I'm calling it war and not civil war because it's an invasion. This is an invasion of Syria by a coalition of US government, Saudis, Qatar, Turkey. The terrorists are by now mostly foreigners, so we can't call it a civil war. Civil war is when the majority of fighters on both sides are locals. If on one side the vast majority are foreigners, then it's an invasion. In the Great Patriotic War with the Nazis, General Vlasov was a defector, fought for the Nazis. Some Russian prisoners were fighting for the Nazis, but we don't call it a civil war. So, before we strike against the terrorists, we need to think about defending from their retaliation. And those are essentially one and the same. Defending from terrorists and beating terrorists, because they are done by essentially the same methods. The main goal in a war with terrorism is to stop terrorists coming across your borders. This is the first task you have to solve in order to win. So, just so you know, the Syrian army has destroyed more terrorists than there are currently fighting. But more and more keep coming, so they don't run out of fighters. So that's the coalition that I've been mentioning. Those are the countries that send terrorists, arm them, fund them, and recruit them everywhere across the world, including by the way, in Russia, our compatriots. So, um, as our government has started noticing correctly that there are plenty of our Russian citizens who are fighting in Syria. And 2,000 is a low estimate. There are larger numbers being mentioned, and the Syrians themselves give larger numbers. We won't get into it, but the numbers are larger. And, they constantly rotate, they come and go. So, how many came back by now? We don't know. Okay, some of them have been caught and the security services are following them, but some of them we don't know about. So that's the truth. So we need to secure the borders. That's something we could really work towards and be most effective at. Killing insurgents, it's like fighting cockroaches. They're coming from their nest and then hiding in all the nooks and crannies. So killing them by one in those nooks and crannies is pointless. You need to hit them in the nest, in the source, and that's the only option. Otherwise, we will spend time bombing. Our planes will lose their resource, and insurgents will keep coming. I recall towards the end of the Soviet, when the Soviets were withdrawing from Afghanistan and heroin production started, it was coming through Iran. And Iranians basically moved out all the villagers from 200 miles along the border to stop the smuggling. But the smugglers would feed their donkeys heroin, and the heroined up donkeys would run across. Of course, there are many problems, but there is no other option. If we manage to even cut down the flow of terrorists seriously, that would solve a lot of problems. And we need to close the borders not just in Syria, but also our own borders. Because let's say we manage to defeat terrorists in Syria and score a serious victory, then those cockroaches will scatter all over the world, including back to Russia. Yeah, yesterday I've seen on TV some dude from Dagestan, I think, in Russia, was saying that he took his whole family, his wife, his 4 kids, his mom, and he went there, lived there, yeah, somewhere like in ISIS, I think, the terrorist organization. And I don't know, but I wouldn't believe a guy like that he has simply visited there, that nothing happened to him, that he's not harboring some intentions. Yes, we have seen villages and towns taken over by our guys, meaning our compatriots, Russian citizens. So they take over a village, they completely make the locals move out. By the way, this is by the Turkish border. So they move their families, they move in, take it over, and think they own it now. Some of them, get tired of it, they move back. But, according to their passports, they never went anywhere. They just went on a tourist trip to Turkey. They just go there, change their passports, and make some fake IDs, or they go to Georgia or something, you know. Oh yes, or go to Turkey. We have a visa-free regime. They go somewhere. Now there's reports that such operations are happening in Ukraine as well. So after they leave Russia, they get different IDs with different last names. So, and that's another reason why it's hard to estimate how many our citizens are over in Syria. Even when they're killed, their ID papers are usually fake. So it's hard to figure out who they are. I will say even more about this. So when those extremists flood our Asian and Caucasus bordering regions, the first thing we'll see are millions of refugees. And what can we do? You know, EU is already in trouble, and we are not that much better prepared. And you know, the insurgents will come to Tatarstan, to Bashkortostan in Russia. Yes, and you can't tell between terrorists and refugees. That's what happened in Syria. The big second wave of terrorists were mostly among Iraqi refugees or refugees from Libya. You know, refugees come, you can't shoot them, right? They let them in, and you know, maybe there's 5% of terrorists maybe among them, even less. But even 1%, that's enough. And that flood essentially engulfed Syria.
А как границу-то перекрыть? То есть это мы скажем, что источник угрозы, например, Турция, которая является членом НАТО, а значит, у нее за спиной стоит блок НАТО. В том случае
Only if Turkey is not the aggressor. Rule number one of NATO is that they don't support aggressors. So we don't view NATO, Turkey, as a NATO member, but we tell the Turks, and this has been proven many times and very easy to prove as many times as we need, that insurgents are coming from Turkey. If Turkey is sending them, then they are the aggressor. If Turkey is not sending them, then we can help Turks fight them. So we'll be fighting insurgents in their training camps in Turkey. And this is much more effective because they are far more concentrated there. And this way, we would stop them from coming across the border. If we close the borders, then the Syrian army, well, maybe not in half a year like before, but in a year they would wipe out the ones that are already in country. This would be effective if we did it 2 years ago. It would have prevented the whole thing if we did it 4 years ago. But if we tell the Saudis, say, that from training camps in your territory through Jordan, terrorists are coming into Syria, and tell them to stop the invasion, then we could help our ally fight the invaders. And Syria is our ally, even officially. We have a 1980 allied agreement with them. Of course, to help them, we also need to stop the enemy coalition flying over Syria. When Americans are conducting their campaign against ISIS, they are mostly not bombing ISIS, but they are collecting intelligence for the terrorists they control. And moreover, they collect intelligence on the Syrian air defense system, so they could disable it in the first strike, like in Libya. So that should be stopped as soon as possible. If we try to ally with them and work together with them, that would just help them, because they are not there for the Syrian people, not for the country of Syria.
не понимают, что там надо делать, потому что это такое кубло, которое, по-моему, либо с саблей разрубить напополам и на этом все закончить, а это опять реки крови. Не решение, потому что...
No, this wouldn't solve anything. Those cockroaches would just scatter. No mass strike, no military operation can solve this problem. Thank God we didn't start a ground operation. That would have been much, much worse. It's not enough to increase the numbers of Syrian army by 50 or 100,000 of our soldiers. They will inflict some tactical defeats, take some losses. More mercenaries will come from Saudi Arabia, Turkey, etc. So this would last forever. So, like it says in the song. So we need to solve this at its root. However scary and hard this is, we need to stand against the real enemies, to say who they are. We shouldn't invite the king of Jordan or something to Moscow, except, well, to tell him that he should stop doing what he is doing. Hopefully that's why they invited him in the first place, yes, but we don't know what they were talking about. So, after all, I think we should talk about these things openly, directly, on the highest government levels, that they are not our partners, they are enemies of Russia, Syria, and the world. Of course, there's a lot of problems associated with it, but without doing it, we won't be able to do anything. We will spend money, we will lose soldiers, we will lose planes, which we don't have that many of, unfortunately. Yes, after ruin of democratic reforms, we are trying to rebuild, but the numbers of our air force are much lower than they were during the Soviet times, and most of the planes are from the Soviet era, so they can't fly for very long. So what do jihadis want? Nobody cares what the jihadis want. Their owners want them to do things. What the jihadis want, why does it matter? Okay, yes, the Wahhabi, the religious extremism, is a religion of the illiterates. Those people are completely dumb. They are uneducated. It's no accident that all the jihadis in Syria come from remote villages. There were very few of them in large cities. And the main beef they had with Assad and with the Syrian government was that he was secular and making them to go to school, that he was educating them, educating their women, and that was complete perversion to them. So they offer a return to the roots, back to the 7th, 8th century. You know, the further back, the better. So, you know, when the religion was much more pure, times were simpler, everybody who disagrees, they will kill. But, you know, they offer something. And as you know, Islam, unlike Christianity, which offers love, Islam offers justice. So they have ideology that they offer and that attracts people. And what do we have to offer ideologically? what can we oppose them with? They want justice. What do we offer our Muslims? Talking crap about Stalin? Well, it's great, but it's not really a national ideology. And it's not something you can stand up against jihadism. As you know, our constitution is against having a national ideology, so you're committing a crime here. Yes, yes, they're talking about changing it because, having a constitution that bans having an ideology, that's stupid, that's destroying the country. Yeah, yeah. So, without an ideology, we can't offer anything.
Понятно, эти предлагают справедливость. В США предлагают жрать досыта, жить богато.
У нас было предложение.
Well, we had something to offer before. It was maybe it wasn't very well done, but at least that was something we declared: equality and justice. That's what it was, right? At least that we got some of it done, and that equality and justice was far superior to the justice that Wahhabis, jihadists, declare. Their justice is very simple: take everything, eat it. If you are rich and I am poor, then I will destroy you and destroy industry, destroy everything that makes people developed and rich. Not make themselves richer, but make everybody like them. Destroy everything that is above their level. So instead of making everybody equal and bringing everybody up and balanced, instead of bringing everybody to the middle level, they just want to bring everybody down to their level, to their primitive level. So that's the difference. So our idea of justice, I think that's
Слово, которое ты назвал,
what we can offer.
это наша национальная идея.
So I think, yes, justice, equality is our national idea, and this is what distinguishes the Russian culture, desire for justice. That's why we're so against injustice. That's why we've always been supporting the oppressed peoples around the globe. So I don't think we can have another ideology, because any other ideology would serve a small group of people and leave the rest open to be converted by jihadists
Всего нашего сообщества.
to fight perceived injustice. So our whole nation can only be motivated by justice for all. So until we have an ideology like that, I don't think we can successfully resist jihadism. Hopefully our government catches on to that and starts doing something about it.
Это второй, так сказать, слой.
So that's the second level of the problem. So the first level is the lack of state ideology, nothing to oppose their desire for justice, because we certainly don't have justice here in Russia, as our opposition activists say. But there's another important part of this. Apart from a state ideology that can stand up to the Wahhabi ideology, there's all the talk about Islam, etc. Of course, people tell us that this isn't real Islam, this is quasi-Islam. Of course, everybody knows that there are ultra-violent sects in Christianity, in Buddhism, like in politics. There are right and left, and there's ultra-left and far-right. So, of course, there's extremism in every ideology, and there's extremes at every spectrum. So, what can we oppose them with ideologically and the religious level. So Saudi Arabia is an extremist Islam state. Their official religion is Salafism, and our country does not have places where people can truly learn Islamic religion. There are some basic colleges, and that's it. There are no universities, there are no higher education institutions. So our Muslims have to go to Saudi Arabia, have to go to Qatar to learn Islam. And to really learn Islam, you need to spend 3 years learning Arabic to truly understand Quran in Arabic and in poetry. And there, they just spend half a year learning the basics of Salafism, get a couple small books, basics of Islam, basics of building improvised explosives devices, and then they come back to Russia and spread the Saudi version of Islam. So we're starting to build a Islamic university in Tatarstan, so we're starting something, but we spent 25 years without it. And for 25 years, our Muslims were learning Islam in Saudi Arabia. So I think there's only one real politician, Ramzan Kadyrov, head of Chechnya, who's trying to promote correct Islam that his grandparents and parents believed in, not those bastards that come from abroad with their radical ideology, but the religion that Muslims in Russia always believed. But somehow only Ramzan Kadyrov understands that you have to have correct Islamic traditional priests that correctly preach Islam and correctly explain it to the young people. And of course, there are different sects in Islam. There are, of course, in Chechnya, there's Sufis who fighting Islam, and they understand that they will be wiped out by the Saudis. But, you know, of course, Ramzan Kadyrov is a real man, and he understands what's happening, but in the rest of Russia, not a whole lot is being done. So if this happens in within the Islamic faith, then the Islamic leaders should resist it. It's not up to the Orthodox Christians to come and help the Islamic leadership. If they need help, they should ask for it, and we should try to help them, but I don't see a whole lot of that being done. So, and I have noticed that, you know, in Tatarstan, extremists are moving in, going to mosques, killing the traditional priests, and forcing them to preach the more radical versions, forcing them to preach hatred to Christians. Well, then maybe our security services should handle this if such things are happening. Such people should not act in our territory. Maybe they should instead spend some time in Siberia behind barbed wire. Of course, yeah, we could keep them abroad, but then they would probably go to Syria and get experience. So I think such things are dangerous. It's like an epidemic. You know, there's if somebody is infected, then he should be quarantined. You know, if you have that infection, then maybe you should spend 20 years or so in quarantine and think about the failings of your radical ideology. And that's not being done, right? Yes, very true. Those problems are very complex and they don't have a single simple solution. So it has to be done from multiple directions, by religious leaders, and it's happening not just in Tatarstan, but in all the regions. Even in the historically Christian regions, they're moving in. And, I'm talking to a lot of traditional Muslims and with our security services, and that's a complex issue that is not easy to solve, and it needs to be solved via state policy to religious extremism. You have said some very correct things, that there are extremist Christians as well, but nobody is trying to define, this is a cult and this is a religion. They're Christians.
А это уголовное преступление, в общем-то.
На самом деле, да.
Yes, that's true.
Сидеть.
Совершенно верно. Поэтому
Exactly. So this needs to be solved from multiple directions by different measures. So need to work with religious leaders, need to filter the radicals. Of course, the security services have to work, need to have border control, and find fake ID papers, because a lot of people cross the border, get fake IDs, use the countries that we have a visa-free regime with, and it's not that hard to get fake Russian documents over there, and people come here with fake passports already.
И они все равно вернутся, конечно.
And those people, they will come back from Syria, so we need to take measures, and we need to prepare now, as soon as possible. And those measures I keep talking about, we need to understand how Syria is fighting extremism. We can't use the tactics that worked back in World War II, or even in Afghanistan or Chechnya. Each war is a new way of fighting. You can't fight a guerrilla movement like you fought in World War II. So the measure here is to use the Syrian experience that has worked out very well for them so far, is citizens working with the state. I have said before that if you take a map of Syria and look where the terrorists have moved in successfully and where they have failed to take over, it is essentially the same as the map of areas where local self-defense has been organized. You could call it militia, you could call it volunteer deputies. So those are citizens who are organized and supported and trained by the state, and trained to cooperate with security services, with the police, and with the army. Yes, they get weapons if there is anticipated fighting. There's no need for them to be constantly armed. There's no, like random guys walking around town with rifles. But, at least they know where they can get their weapons. They can contact all the law enforcement agencies. They know what they need to do. So, the real problem here that with terrorists, when terrorists attack, one of the main problems is that the civilians don't act correctly. Here's the problem. So, we have a lot of people here called, what do you call them? Survivalists. Yeah, survivalists. That's right. They think that, if they have a gun and they know how to survive, in the wild that would save them from a bunch of insurgents coming in.
Тихо сидеть, чтоб его не видели, ну, наверное, по-моему.
Well, yes, of course, they can hide maybe if they're lucky, but in a town that won't work. So the correct thing to do is to, if you're armed, realize that an armed man who is not in contact with the counterterrorism units, he should not show himself on the street. There are a lot of rules during a counter-terrorist operation, but one of the ground rules is that any armed man is considered a terrorist, obviously. Otherwise, you can't act in a city. So, people tell me that, if there's a counter-terrorist operation and I see a tank shooting at the terrorist, I will shoot the same direction. I tell him that if he starts doing that, then the tank will turn around and put a high explosive shell in his window, because not everybody is dumb like him. And I was trained as a tanker, so a tanker in such a situation would shoot reflexively because he wants to live, and that's his training. Those are the rules. If a man doesn't understand how the counter-terrorist operation works, he will die when it happens. So people need to be trained for this. Yes, so there should be an organization, there should be leadership, there should be a organization. So a group of citizen activists who want to fight terrorism, they come to these organizations and say, we want to help our country if the need arises. So they are enlisted, they are being trained, they work together with the army, they are familiarized with the units that will be acting in their town, or at least with the leaders of these units. They get communication channels to receive information about danger and to report danger to correct law enforcement agencies. And there are a lot of these people. You don't need, every 10th person to be in the self-defense force, but if you have between 1/10 and 1% of the population in the defense forces, terrorists cannot move in. That's how it works. So that's the successful practical application. In the places where these defense forces have not organized, regardless of how many armed citizens were there, they were all individuals. And even if they organized in groups, they became simply gangs, which both to the law enforcement were gangs, and both to the terrorists, they were simply a competing small gang. And nothing else really.
По всей видимости, именно их американцы имеют в виду, когда говорят, что там есть умеренные.
Yes, that's whom. Those are the moderates that Americans keep referring to. Some of these ephemeral units.
Если ты не с ним, значит ты против
С
него.
такими умеренными обычно
Yeah, so these moderates aren't really a big problem. So when the army is about to move in, most of them usually lay the weapons down and surrender, and say that they're not going to fight. And once the extremists are defeated, they are checked, they sign that they will not fight the army, they are let go, and most of the time they immediately enlist in the self-defense forces. So, and they get training, they get weapons.
сколько ни было населенных пунктов.
So, in all the towns where insurgents tried to attack but were defeated, all of them had an organized self-defense force.
Я сейчас пытаюсь
Um,
заниматься этим.
I'm trying to work on this in Russia,
Почему-то
but
всего у чиновников
unfortunately,
он не
the government officials are not too hot on this. Maybe I was incorrect starting to talk about militia from the very beginning, and everybody started thinking about those disorganized gangs with rifles, so they were sort of standoffish on this. Um, but I'm trying to push this through in various ways and with various organizations. Unfortunately, usually the people who are willing to help are at the lower levels of government.
В целом-то с точки зрения государства это ж непонятно.
на самом деле
Yes, from a government standpoint, it's risky, but in case of terrorist attacks, that's going to happen anyway. The people are going to arm themselves and they're going to organize, but either they do it with the government and act together to fight terrorism, and that would cause actually less problems for the government, because that would need to be done anyway. Or people would do it by themselves, and they would die. That would be ineffective, and that would interfere with the army operations. So it will need to be done, but either we do it correctly or we don't.
есть на самом
There is a organizations that understand this. Recently, I was talking to the organization that did this in Syria. They had something similar to USSR's ROTC.
с полицией,
Um,
может быть, сигнал получен.
yeah. So, working, we are working with the police. We're establishing communications with them. And regarding the weapons, I'm not a specialist, of course, but any decent man these days has a hunting weapon, and to resist terrorists, one doesn't need a high caliber sniper rifle that shoots a mile. I would think that in defending your city in urban warfare, even a hunting shotgun would be quite enough, actually.
В войне побеждает
In this kind of war, it's not about the weapons, it's about organization, really. So, at the lower levels, we are communicating, and hopefully we'll be successful there and develop something broader. With me or without me, with the Cossacks or somebody else, but hopefully, and the Cossacks are also working with the ROTC branches here, with the police, etc. Here, there are people who come here, like the Denis, who's running a training camp, and Yuri, who's a military medic.
Денис,
Yeah.
Юрий, военврач.
So we are working on this, and they are working on similar things, and we're working on these questions. So we are working on a document which would outline, without saying the word militia, a program for the military patriotic education of the citizens.
Не хотят бегать с оружием. Это вообще странные мальчики.
Of course, yeah, all the boys want to run around with weapons. And those who want to need to be trained correctly and, run around in correct places. So this is understood at the district levels of ROTC. So they are interested, but it would be much better if we had understanding at the federal government level, because doing it at the lower level
ну, малоэффективно.
and it's not really effective because each of these individual organizations you have to negotiate with officials, figure out regulations. It takes a very long time, and you can't really do it on a country-wide scale. So to do it in mass, it needs to be done by the federal government.
Понимаете, чиновники
Or, yes, maybe. Well, we won't make it into federal government that easily.
Разные есть, надо это ломать.
разные есть, да.
Yeah, those that go into federal government, they are a bit different from us.
Плюс нам, конечно, нужно уделить большое внимание качеству информационной войны.
Also, we need to pay attention to the quality of information warfare, because,
Я упоминал уже ролики Министерства
well, for example, I have mentioned the movies that our Ministry of Defense put out, and out of these clips, most are just bad. Out of 70, a few are good, but the rest,
написано одно,
well, they say one thing in the description of the clip, and you can see that something else is happening.
необходимо как-то оценивать
So we need to evaluate the effectiveness of what the country and what the government is doing, because in the information space, people are divided into two camps: the people who always approve everything government does, regardless of whether it's good or bad, and those who disapprove of everything the government is doing, regardless of whether it's successful or not. Any criticism has to be correct. You shouldn't applaud when you see something bad, but at the same time, you shouldn't criticize everything without understanding it. So those who are criticizing everything and those who are supporting everything are enemies of our country and enemies of our people, because it is destructive. When I was a officer in the army, I always told my subordinates to voice their concerns, and especially if they think that I am wrong. Of course, I'm the one making the decisions, but if I don't understand that I'm wrong, then we are going to die together. So if they criticize something correctly, that's good. So, and if they're afraid to tell me that I'm wrong, and I don't know that I'm wrong, then they're going to die, and I'm going to die. So we need to learn to provide feedback to the federal government. Making them listen to it is harder, but at least that is our duty as citizens.
Раньше относительно там безумно.
So, coming back to what you said about the strikes and the 5 billion that the Americans spent, and etc. They have the experience of the Vietnam War, where which was stopped more or less by journalists and photographers publishing pictures of napalm-drenched Vietnamese children and such. So the society has stopped accepting the war, and the war had to be stopped. So they have learned a lesson there. So when in 1991 they invaded Iraq for the first time, they have made correct conclusions. They have filtered the journalists and only allowed the correct journalists to come in. Those who supported the party line, who well, voiced everything from the government's point of view and only showed what the government wanted. So that was very well organized. So the mass media published a splendid picture of the American aviation and tanks moving in, doing everything correctly, hitting everything dead on, destroying all those Soviet tanks twice over. You know, like like the Germans in 1941 had destroyed 3 times more planes than the Soviet army possessed. But the picture for the population was splendid. Those journalists who didn't make it into the press pool for the Iraq War and who weren't in the party, so called, they called it the most lied about war in US history. But, that's a lesson to be learned. We know it, but we don't do the same thing. We show pictures of us bombing water filtration facilities and calling it oil plants. So I would look into who published that video clip, who is responsible for it, who selected it, why aren't people in charge capable of telling water filtration facilities from oil derricks, and if those people are incapable, should they be fired or maybe persecuted? Well, we don't, yes, we don't necessarily need to lie as much as Americans did back then, but we need to learn a lesson from them and take the positive things from those lessons. And we also need to talk about the actions of the secret services in the internet, where we publish these videos of ours. So there are social networks, Facebook, VKontakte, where those Islamic extremists are doing great, doing whatever they want, publishing videos saying that they will shed the blood of the infidels. Great movies, very well done. Can we identify who's publishing them? Can we find the groups they are being organized in? Can we track the people joining those groups? We might not close them right away, but we should follow who's joining them, what they're talking about, who's connected to whom, how are they organized. They shouldn't be able to operate so freely. If we allow them to publish their propaganda, the people publishing these videos probably aren't very healthy if they publish people with their heads cut off, and maybe they should spend a year or two with a labor therapy somewhere in Siberia. So, this also needs to be done. Well, the Dmitri Anatolievich Medvedev, the prime minister, said something about, fighting extremism in the internet. But nothing has been done specifically, so we'll see how they handle it. So, to sum things up, what can we say? I suppose we can wish our compatriots and leadership to handle these questions from all directions and to work together, the Russian government and the Russian people, because until we start working together, the majority of citizens and the majority of government officials, we won't be able to stand up to terrorism. And overall, this question is complex and it involves everything. Ideology, involves interaction between low-level government officials and people. It involves foreign policy and domestic policy and religion. But I think the main thing is to understand that we're all in the same boat, and the leadership of the country cannot live without the citizens, and the citizen cannot live without the government. We need to really start doing something, because I'm afraid that we don't have much time at all.
У них там другие проблемы. У них десталинизация, декоммунизация, десоветизация.
Ну, они думают, что у них другие проблемы на самом деле.
Они хотят
They're thinking that they have these other problems, and they think that they can get away from this problem. But chances that they'll manage to flee the country and go to the West, like many people have done before, I think that's long gone. All the tickets have been sold, and we're all on the Titanic together. So yes, or yeah, there are no ships left, only barges. So hopefully the government cleans up, understands what's going on. Well, that's unfortunate that for the government to realize what's going on, we must be facing such external pressure that we must see hundreds of thousands of people being killed in this way. But, like as it says, unless the peasant hears the thunder, he does not
мужик не перекрестится.
think about God.
Что руку уже занесли.
Ну и всем нам удачи.
So, thank you very much. Good luck to you, Vasily. That's it. See you later.